For years, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was the mountain of Hollywood, unchanging, unshakable. But when he stepped onto the red carpet this year, fans were left stunned because The Rock wasn't looking like The Rock anymore. When Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson walked into the spotlight at the Venice and Toronto film festivals, the crowd wasn't just looking at a Hollywood megastar. They were staring at a version of him no one expected. The Rock, the man known for being larger than life, looked noticeably smaller, leaner, and almost unrecognizable compared to the bulked-up action hero fans have seen for decades. Social media lit up instantly. Some fans praised the change, saying he looked healthier and younger. Others couldn't hide their shock, posting side-by-side pictures that made it seem like Johnson had shed decades of his trademark look overnight. This wasn't the first time audiences had reacted to his size, but the intensity of the buzz was on another level. Is he sick? Is it stress? Did The Rock finally ditch the steroids? Those were the kinds of questions racing across timelines within hours. Even memes began flooding in, joking that The Rock had turned into the Pebble. It was the type of internet storm that could have easily turned ugly. But instead, Johnson leaned into the mystery and didn't shy away. He was smiling, confident, and seemingly enjoying the whispers around him. And that's when the real story began to unfold. Far from being accidental, the transformation was part of something much bigger. Johnson himself admitted that this wasn't just about slimming down. It was about reshaping his entire career. He had prepared for roles before, sure, but never like this. Fans were used to seeing him grow even bigger for movies like Fast and Furious or Black Adam. But this time, he was moving in the opposite direction, stripping away the armor that had defined him for so long. On the red carpet, he cracked a joke about eating less chicken, but the truth was far more intense. Behind the humor was a deliberate plan, losing pounds of muscle to step into the shoes of someone else entirely. And the dedication wasn't just surface level. Johnson explained that this transformation was about authenticity, about honoring the real people and characters he was set to portray. In that moment, the weight loss wasn't a weakness. It was a challenge he had taken head-on. What stunned people most wasn't just the change itself. It was the fact that The Rock seemed unfazed by the noise. He knew fans were whispering, speculating, even doubting him. But instead of defending himself, he let the silence build curiosity. And when he finally revealed why, the truth shocked everyone even more. Because this wasn't just about looking different. It was about proving that even the world's strongest man could transform in ways no one thought possible. The real reason behind The Rock's dramatic transformation came to light when he revealed his role in The Smashing Machine, a biopic about MMA legend Mark Kerr. This wasn't just another Hollywood gig. It was one of the most physically and emotionally demanding roles of his career. To embody Kerr, Johnson had to do something he had rarely done before: shrink, not grow. Mark Kerr wasn't just a fighter. He was a man whose life was as turbulent outside the cage as it was inside it. Known in the late 90s and early 2000s as one of the most dominant forces in mixed martial arts, Kerr's story was equal parts triumph and tragedy. He was a powerhouse who won championships, but also battled demons behind the scenes. For Johnson, playing Kerr meant more than just wearing gloves and throwing punches. It meant carrying the weight of a complex legacy, and paradoxically, it meant losing his own physical weight to match the reality of Kerr's frame. Fans are used to Johnson showing up to sets looking like a human tank, his muscles practically bursting out of shirts. But Kerr's body was different. Athletic, tough, but not the comic book proportions that had become Johnson's trademark. That's why The Rock started cutting down, shedding layers of muscle to capture a more grounded, authentic physique. He admitted it was a shock even to him, stepping away from the Iron Paradise routine that had defined his life for decades. The gamble paid off. At the Venice Film Festival premiere, The Smashing Machine stunned audiences, not just because Johnson looked different, but because he acted different. The once unstoppable action hero suddenly appeared vulnerable, human and raw. When the credits rolled, the entire theater erupted into a standing ovation that lasted over 15 minutes. Johnson, usually the rock-solid figure who never wavers, broke down in tears. It was the kind of response that proved this wasn't just another blockbuster performance. It was a career-defining moment. For Johnson, the transformation wasn't only about muscles and diets. It was about tearing down the walls of his Hollywood persona. He confessed that he didn't want to be remembered only as the guy who lifted trucks and smashed through walls on screen. He wanted to be taken seriously as an actor who could disappear into a role. even if that meant shocking the world with a body that looked unfamiliar. And yet, as stunning as the performance was, Johnson wasn't done. He told reporters after the premiere that the transformation for the Smashing Machine was only the beginning. His next role would demand even more from him, pushing him further outside the safe zone he had built over years of blockbusters. Fans were left wondering, if he could already slim down this much for Kerr, what could possibly come next? The answer would be stranger, riskier, and even more surprising than anyone could have imagined. Just as fans were processing The Rock's shocking metamorphosis for the Smashing Machine, he dropped another bombshell. He wasn't finished changing. In fact, the role of Mark Kerr was only step one. His next project, a surreal film titled Lizard Music, would demand an even greater departure from the muscular action icon audiences thought they knew. In this new film, directed by Benny Safdie, Johnson isn't playing a hero, a warrior, or even a larger-than-life legend. He's playing a character known simply as Chicken Man, a quirky, eccentric septuagenarian who is nothing like the bold, brash personas he's built his career on. For the first time in decades, Johnson wasn't preparing to dominate a screen through sheer size and physicality. Instead, he was tasked with shrinking down even further, softening his edges, and stepping into the shoes of a man defined more by his peculiarities than his muscles. When the news broke, many thought it was a joke. The Rock, the same guy who once carried an entire helicopter on screen, now playing an elderly man nicknamed after poultry? But Johnson wasn't laughing. He revealed that he had already started dropping even more weight to align with the role, admitting publicly that "I've got a long way to go." He even cracked self-deprecating jokes about eating less chicken to get into character, a line that immediately went viral because of its irony. But beneath the humor was a much deeper message. Johnson explained that he was deliberately moving away from being pigeonholed as Hollywood's eternal action figure. He wanted to prove that he could embrace vulnerability, humor, and eccentricity just as fully as he had embraced strength and power. Lizard Music wasn't about explosions, fight scenes, or heroics. It was about character, and for Johnson, that meant tearing down the very image that had made him famous. Fans had mixed reactions. Some applauded his courage, calling it a bold leap that showed his hunger to grow as an actor. Others were baffled. Social media erupted with comments like, "From Black Adam to Chicken Man? What's happening?" Memes popped up of Johnson holding a bucket of fried chicken instead of dumbbells, or side-by-side shots labeling him the boulder in his prime and the pebble today. But Johnson didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned into the mystery, keeping the buzz alive by teasing that his transformation was far from finished. Industry insiders were quick to note that this was a career move reminiscent of actors who risked everything to break free from typecasting. Johnson, once the wrestler who became the blockbuster king, was now on a mission to prove he could be more than a single brand. And if that meant fans didn't recognize him anymore, he was okay with that, because in his eyes, a real risk wasn't shrinking in size. The real risk was staying the same. And as audiences debated whether this was genius or madness, Johnson was already preparing to show that the strangest chapter of his career might be the most powerful yet. For years, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was more than just a Hollywood name. He was a brand. The muscles, the eyebrow maze, the larger-than-life charisma. He didn't just star in action movies, he became the action movie. Studios banked on his physique as much as his personality, building franchises around his unstoppable presence. But that was exactly the image Johnson realized he needed to challenge. In interviews after his dramatic weight loss reveal, Johnson opened up about a fear most fans never imagined he had: being typecast. He admitted that Hollywood has a way of locking actors into boxes. Once audiences accept you as the strongman, the muscle-bound hero, it's almost impossible to be seen as anything else. And while Johnson loved giving fans the adrenaline-filled spectacles they expected, he quietly craved more. He wanted to explore characters who were messy, vulnerable, even strange. Characters who couldn't simply solve problems with brute force. That's why his physical transformation meant so much more than just a new diet or workout routine. By stripping away the very thing that had defined him, his size, Johnson was also stripping away the stereotype that had trapped him. It wasn't just about eating less chicken, as he joked on the red carpet. It was about feeding a different side of himself as an artist. It was symbolic, letting go of the body that had built his empire so he could chase roles that required something deeper. What makes this shift even more compelling is how openly Johnson embraced it. Most stars fear losing what makes them marketable, but he leaned into the uncertainty with a smile. He told fans, "I'm not just the action guy anymore," making it clear that this wasn't a temporary experiment, it was a reinvention. The same man who had spent decades adding mass and muscle was now deliberately making himself smaller, both physically and in terms of ego, to disappear into his roles. This move was risky. Hollywood is unforgiving when stars stray too far from what made them famous, but Johnson seemed less concerned about box office numbers and more focused on legacy. He'd conquered wrestling. He'd conquered blockbuster franchises. Now he wanted to conquer doubt. The doubt that he couldn't carry a role based on raw acting ability rather than sheer size. For fans, this revelation was equal parts inspiring and shocking. Many respected the honesty and ambition, but others wondered aloud if Johnson was gambling too much. Would audiences accept a leaner, more vulnerable Rock? Or would they turn away, missing the superhero figure they'd come to idolize? Johnson's answer was simple. He wasn't doing it for acceptance. He was doing it for evolution. The muscles had told one kind of story. Now he was ready to tell another. And in that choice, he broke free of the mold that had once seemed unshakable. But while Johnson was redefining his career, fans around the world couldn't stop buzzing. And what they were saying, online, in headlines, and in locker room chatter, was a whole other story. If there's one thing the internet never does, it's stay quiet when a celebrity looks different. The moment The Rock stepped out with his leaner frame, fans went into overdrive. Photos from the Venice and Toronto red carpets spread like wildfire, and within hours, hashtags like #ThePebble and #RockTransformation were trending worldwide. Some fans were quick to praise his dedication. They saw the change as proof of his relentless commitment to his craft. Only The Rock would sacrifice years of building the most iconic physique in Hollywood just to get a role right, one fan tweeted, earning thousands of likes. Others applauded the fact that he wasn't clinging to the same image forever, calling his shift the ultimate flex because real strength is being able to let go. But admiration was only half the story. A wave of concern, and in some cases outright mockery, came rushing in too. Rumors swirled on Reddit and Twitter threads, with people speculating whether Johnson's weight loss was really about acting or if something more serious was going on behind the scenes. Some questioned his health, suggesting gut issues he had briefly mentioned in past interviews might be back. Others took a darker angle, whispering about possible long-term effects of decades of wrestling, or claiming he had finally gotten off the juice, sparking debates about whether his body had been chemically enhanced all along. Antonio Brown, never one to shy away from controversy, even piled on, posting a side-by-side of Johnson with a snide caption about coming off the cycle. It added fuel to the steroid speculation, with sports forums lighting up in heated debates. Was The Rock simply acting? Or was this a revelation about what years of intense training and supplements had really looked like? Johnson didn't bite back at any of it. He stayed silent, letting fans argue among themselves while keeping his focus on the work. Wrestling circles weren't quiet either, with he always teasing the possibility of his return to the ring. Many fans started to question if the transformation meant his comeback was off the table for good. How's he gonna headline WrestleMania if he's half the size? One comment read, while another countered, he doesn't need the size, he's The Rock. A name sells itself. Meanwhile, memes flooded Instagram and TikTok. Clips of him lifting weights in the past were remixed with captions like, "When you cancel your gym membership for Hollywood." Others went for laughs, dubbing him the Stone or the Pebble as a tongue-in-cheek downgrade. For every person celebrating his artistic risk, there were just as many poking fun. And yet, through all the noise, something undeniable was happening. People were talking about him more than ever. In an era where stars fight to stay relevant, Johnson's transformation had made him the center of the conversation again. Not because of a blockbuster explosion, but because of the mystery behind his new look. The speculation, the jokes, the debates, they all kept his name trending. And while fans argued about whether he was fading away or reinventing himself, Johnson was already focusing on the bigger picture, one that would define his legacy in ways no one saw coming. As the headlines, memes, and whispers circled endlessly, Dwayne Johnson's silence spoke louder than the noise. While fans argued over whether he had lost his edge or was hiding some secret illness, The Rock quietly pushed forward with something far more intentional. For him, this wasn't just about preparing for 2 movies. It was about rewriting the story of his career, and maybe even redefining what strength means altogether. For years, Johnson's identity had been built on the same foundation: bigger, stronger, tougher. From wrestling rings to Hollywood sets, he was the immovable object and the unstoppable force rolled into one. That image turned him into a global superstar, but it also became a trap. He knew that if he didn't evolve, he'd risk becoming a caricature of himself, just another action figure replaying the same role again and again. So when he decided to strip away the muscle, he was doing something few stars of his stature ever dared to do. He was taking away the very thing people thought made him The Rock. It was a gamble, but it was also a statement. Strength, he seemed to be saying, isn't just about how much you can lift or how massive you look on screen. Strength is about adaptability. Strength is about being willing to shed an old identity to step into something new. In his own words, Johnson explained that he didn't want to be pigeonholed. He didn't want to be remembered only for playing gods, soldiers, or superheroes. He wanted to show audiences, and maybe even himself, that he could disappear into roles that were messy, emotional, and unpredictable. Playing Mark Kerr was about capturing vulnerability and pain. Playing Chicken Man was about embracing eccentricity and strangeness. Neither role depended on his biceps, and that was exactly the point. Industry insiders have compared this pivot to other career-defining transformations, actors who broke free from typecasting to find greater depth. But Johnson's case carries an extra weight. He isn't just stepping away from an image. He's dismantling a legacy of physical dominance that millions of fans around the world associated with him. That kind of change doesn't just affect how Hollywood sees him. It challenges how audiences see the idea of masculinity, heroism, and power itself. And perhaps that's why the reactions have been so divided. Fans aren't just watching The Rock change. They're watching the collapse of a symbol they thought was unshakable. For some, it's unsettling. For others, it's inspiring. But either way, it's impossible to ignore. What's certain is that Johnson seems more focused than ever. He isn't chasing applause or approval. He's chasing evolution. And in doing so, he may be carving out a new chapter in his career that has less to do with box office numbers and more to do with artistic impact. Because when the dust settles and the memes fade, The Rock's transformation won't just be remembered as weight loss. It will be remembered as the moment he proved that the strongest man in Hollywood didn't need to stay the biggest. He just needed to keep moving forward. Dwayne Johnson built an empire on being unshakable. But now he's proving that true power isn't about never changing. It's about daring to evolve when the world least expects it. So the real question is, if The Rock himself can break the mold, what excuse does anyone else have for staying the same?